The church fell silent as tears streamed down Isabella Diaz's face. Her white gown pulled around her wheelchair like a broken promise. The man who had pledged to love her forever now stood tall above her, his face twisted with cruel resolve. "I can't do this," he announced to the stunned guests. "I can't marry someone like her." The words hung in the air like poison as Isabella's world shattered before the altar. Isabella had always known life wasn't fair. Orphaned as a small child and confined to a wheelchair since birth, she had fought for every moment of happiness in her 26 years. Finding love had seemed like a miracle, a chance at the family she'd never had. But now, on what should have been the happiest day of her life, that dream was crumbling before her eyes. The wedding guests shifted uncomfortably, whispers rippling through the church. Some faces showed pity, others morbid fascination at the spectacle of her humiliation. Her fiancé, Ryan Miller, had stepped back from her wheelchair as though her disability might somehow be contagious. The diamond ring he'd placed on her finger 6 months ago now felt like a shackle, binding her to this moment of ultimate betrayal. "You knew what you were getting into," Isabella whispered, her voice breaking. "You said it didn't matter." "I was wrong," Ryan replied coldly. "I thought I could handle it, but I can't spend my life with someone who needs so much." The church doors slammed open. A collective gasp swept through the crowd as heavy footsteps echoed down the aisle. All heads turned toward the entrance where a tall figure stood silhouetted against the bright daylight outside. Even without seeing his face clearly, an unmistakable aura of danger surrounded him. As he stepped forward into the church's dim light, recognition dawned on many faces, followed by fear. Dominic Costello. The name alone caused people to cross the street in broad daylight. His reputation as the city's most feared mafia boss wasn't just whispered rumor. It was written in blood across the city's underworld. What business could possibly bring such a man to a wedding? Dominic moved with predatory grace down the aisle, his expensive black suit immaculate, his face expressionless. Behind him followed 2 men, one older with a scarred face, another younger with cold eyes, both clearly armed beneath their jackets. The wedding guests shrank back as they passed, parents pulling children closer, men instinctively stepping in front of their wives. Ryan's face had drained of all color. "Mr. Costello," he stammered. I don't understand." Dominic didn't acknowledge him. His dark eyes were fixed solely on Isabella, whose tears had momentarily stopped from sheer shock. There was something in his gaze that none of the terrified onlookers could decipher, an intensity that went beyond the coldness they expected from a man of his reputation. Without a word, Dominic closed the distance to the altar. He towered over Isabella in her wheelchair, his broad shoulders blocking the light from the stained glass windows above. For one terrible moment, Isabella thought he might be there to hurt her. Perhaps she owed a debt she didn't know about, or someone in her past had crossed this dangerous man. Instead, Dominic knelt down to her eye level. Up close, she could see the hardness in his face, the small scar that ran along his jaw, the eyes that had witnessed and caused untold violence. Yet, there was something else there, too, something she couldn't name. "Isabella," he said, his voice low and rough, as if her name was unfamiliar on his tongue. It was the first word he'd spoken since entering the church. She stared back, trembling slightly. "Do I know you?" A muscle twitched in his jaw. "No," he answered simply. Then, to the astonishment of everyone present, Dominic slid one arm beneath her knees and the other behind her back, lifting her from the wheelchair as effortlessly as if she weighed nothing at all. "What are you doing?" Isabella gasped, her hands automatically grasping his shoulders for support. "Put me down." Dominic turned, Isabella secured in his arms, and began walking back down the aisle. The silence was absolute. Not even Ryan dared to protest as the notorious crime lord carried away his abandoned bride. "My wheelchair," Isabella said desperately, looking back over Dominic's shoulder. "I need my—" "Leo," Dominic said without turning. The older of his two men immediately moved to fold the wheelchair and carry it out behind them. Outside the church, a sleek black limousine waited with tinted windows and a driver standing at attention. The bright sunlight made Isabella squint after the dimness of the church. Everything was happening too fast for her to process. The rejection, the humiliation, and now this bizarre kidnapping by a man whose reputation terrified the entire city. "Please," she tried again as Dominic approached the vehicle. "There's been some mistake. I don't know you. I don't owe you anything." Dominic finally looked down at her, his expression unreadable. "No mistakes," he said simply. The younger man hurried forward to open the car door, and Dominic ducked inside with Isabella still cradled against his chest. The interior of the limousine was cool and dark, the leather seats soft beneath her as Dominic finally set her down. Her wedding dress crumpled around her, the expensive fabric now wrinkled and crushed. The two men followed, placing her folded wheelchair in the trunk before sliding into seats opposite them. The doors closed with soft, expensive thuds, sealing her inside with these dangerous strangers. "You can't just take me," Isabella said, her voice stronger now as shock gave way to anger. "That's kidnapping. People saw you. The entire church saw you." Dominic settled beside her, leaving careful space between them. "And what did they do?" he asked quietly. The question silenced her. She had seen the faces of guests, her supposed friends and family. Not one of them had moved to stop this man. Not one had spoken up. They had watched her humiliation and then her abduction with the same passive expressions. "Where are you taking me?" she asked instead, her hands clutching at her dress. "Home," Dominic answered. The limousine pulled away from a curb, leaving behind the church where Isabella's dreams had died. She stared out the window, watching the city streets pass by. She should be screaming, fighting, begging for help from passers-by. Instead, a strange numbness had settled over her. Perhaps she was in shock, or perhaps, in some twisted way, any fate seemed better than returning to the empty apartment she'd shared with Ryan, surrounded by wedding gifts that would need to be returned and a life that had just crumbled to dust. As the limousine navigated through the city, an uncomfortable silence filled the vehicle. The older man, Leo Mancini, watched her with calculated indifference, while the younger one, Tony Gallo, stared out the window, his hand never far from the bulge of what Isabella assumed was a gun beneath his jacket. Dominic himself seemed content with silence, his large hands resting on his knees, his profile sharp against the passing scenery. "You call me by name?" Isabella said finally. "How do you know who I am?" Dominic turned to look at her, his eyes dark and unreadable. "I make it my business to know many things." That's not an answer. The corner of his mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but something that momentarily softened his harsh features. "You're brave. Good. You'll need that." Fear crawled back up Isabella's spine. "Need it for what? What do you want from me?" Dominic didn't respond. Instead, he reached into his jacket pocket, causing Isabella to flinch involuntarily, and withdrew a handkerchief, offering it to her silently. Only then did she realize tears were still streaming down her face. Makeup surely ruined, her carefully styled hair coming loose from its pins. She took the handkerchief reluctantly. "Thank you," she said automatically, years of politeness overriding her fear. The fabric was soft, expensive, with the initials DC embroidered in one corner. She dabbed at her cheeks, the absurdity of worrying about her appearance in this situation not lost on her. The city gradually gave way to suburbs, then to more rural landscapes. They were heading out of town, following a winding road that climbed gently upward into the wooded hills that surrounded the city. Isabella's sense of foreboding grew with each passing mile. People disappeared into these woods. Criminal bodies were found here. The headlines she'd read over morning coffee now took on a terrifying personal relevance. Please, she tried again, her voice smaller. My parents died when I was 3. I have no family. No one will pay ransom for me. I have no money of my own. This isn't about money, Dominic said, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. Then what is it about? He turned to look at her then, something flickering behind his stoic expression. Safety. Before she could question this cryptic response, the limousine turned off the main road onto a private drive guarded by gate and 2 armed men who straightened to attention as the vehicle approached. The gate swung open without the car needing to stop, and they continued up a long, winding driveway bordered by tall trees that blocked out much of the sunlight. When the trees finally parted, Isabella gasped despite herself. Before them stood a mansion unlike anything she had ever seen outside of movies, a sprawling stone structure with Gothic touches, surrounded by immaculately maintained gardens. It wasn't just a house. It was a fortress. High walls circled the property, and Isabella could spot more guards patrolling the perimeter, all carrying weapons openly now that they were on private property. The limousine pulled to a smooth stop at the front entrance, where wide steps led up to massive double doors. Isabella's heart sank as she looked at those steps in immediate, instinctive reaction after years of navigating a world not built for wheels. As if reading her thoughts, Dominic spoke quietly. There's an entrance without steps on the side. But for now, without waiting for a response, he opened his door and stepped out, then turned back to lift her once more into his arms. This time, there was no audience to witness her humiliation. Just the blank-faced security guards who kept their eyes carefully averted as their boss carried a woman in a wedding dress toward the entrance. The younger man, Tony, hurried ahead to open the door while Leo followed with her wheelchair. The interior of the mansion matched its imposing exterior, high ceilings, old-world craftsmanship, and an atmosphere of dark luxury. Dominic carried her through a grand entrance hall and into what appeared to be a sitting room, where he finally set her down on an antique sofa. Her wedding dress pooled around her, the white fabric stark against the deep burgundy upholstery. Your wheelchair? Dominic nodded toward Leo, who unfolded it and positioned it near the sofa. The simple, practical gesture was strangely comforting amid the surreal situation. At least they weren't taking away her mobility. Mr. Costello, a stern female voice called from the doorway. A woman in her 60s stood there, her silver hair pulled back in a tight bun, her posture rigid as a soldier's. She wore a simple black dress and a disapproving expression as she took in the scene before her. Maria, Dominic acknowledged her with a nod. This is Isabella. She'll be staying with us. Prepare the East Wing suite. The woman, Maria Sanchez, gave Isabella an appraising look, taking in the wedding dress, the tear-streaked face, the confusion and fear. Something like sympathy flickered briefly in her eyes before her professional mask returned. Of course, she replied. And shall I send up some appropriate clothing? The lady appears to be unexpectedly dressed. Despite everything, Isabella almost laughed at the understatement. Here she was, essentially kidnapped in her wedding gown, and this woman was concerned about appropriate attire. Yes, Dominic said, and food, and anything else she requires. He turned to Isabella. Maria is my housekeeper. She will help you settle in. If you need anything, ask her. Settle in? Isabella repeated incredulously. I'm not staying here. This is kidnapping. You can't just. I can. Dominic interrupted, his tone making it clear the matter wasn't open for discussion. You will remain here, under my protection, until I determine it's safe for you to leave. Protection from what? Isabella demanded. The only danger I've encountered today is you. A flash of something anger? Hurt. crossed Dominic's face before his expression hardened again. You know nothing of danger, Isabella, but you'll be safe here. He turned to leave, then paused in the doorway. Maria will show you to your rooms. This is your home now. Accept it. With that, he was gone, leaving Isabella alone with the stern housekeeper and the crushing weight of her new reality. She couldn't stop the fresh tears that spilled down her cheeks. Maria sighed, her rigid posture softening slightly. Come, child, she said, her accent becoming more pronounced with a gentler tone. Let's get you out of that dress and into something comfortable. Then food. Things always look better after food. Isabella looked at her wheelchair, then at the unfamiliar room around her. Outside these walls was a world where she'd been abandoned at the altar, humiliated before everyone she knew. Inside was a dangerous man with unknown intentions. Neither option offered comfort. Why am I here? She asked Maria quietly. What does he want with me? The older woman's expression remained neutral, but her eyes held something Isabella couldn't quite read. That is not for me to say, she answered. But I can tell you this, in all my years working for Mr. Costello, I have never seen him look at anyone the way he looked at you. And how was that? Isabella asked bitterly. Like a possession he just acquired? Maria shook her head slowly. No, child. Like a treasure he feared he'd lost forever. Isabella's first night in Dominic Costello's mansion was sleepless. Despite the luxurious bedroom Maria had let her to, a suite larger than the entire apartment she'd shared with Ryan Comfort eluded her. The bed was soft. The sheets were silk, but every creak and distant sound startled her awake. Somewhere in this enormous house was a man who had effectively kidnapped her, whose reputation spoke of violence and cruelty, whose very name made people in the city tremble. Morning light filtered through heavy curtains when Maria entered with a breakfast tray. The older woman had helped Isabella out of her wedding dress the previous evening, providing her with silk pajamas that fit surprisingly well. Now, she carried fresh clothing along with the food. Mr. Costello had these delivered this morning, Maria explained, laying out a simple but elegant outfit, pants and a blouse that would work well for someone in a wheelchair. He guessed your size. If anything doesn't fit, we can have it altered today. Isabella stared at the clothes in confusion. He went shopping for me? Maria's lips twitched in what might have been amusement. Mr. Costello doesn't shop. He makes phone calls. But yes, he arranged for these. There are more in the closet. Isabella wheeled herself to the large walk-in closet and was stunned to find it partially filled with clothing. All in her size, all appropriate for her needs. Dresses designed to look elegant while seated. Pants without bulky back pockets. Several pairs of flat, fashionable shoes. It was the kind of thoughtful, accessible wardrobe she'd always wished she could afford. How did he know? She whispered. Maria, arranging the breakfast tray on a small table, merely shrugged. Mr. Costello notices things others don't. Eat your breakfast before it gets cold. The food was delicious. Fresh fruit. Pastries still warm from the oven. Coffee brewed exactly as she preferred it. Despite her situation, Isabella found herself hungry after the emotional trauma of the previous day. As she ate, she gazed out the window at the extensive grounds. The mansion was even larger than it had appeared upon arrival, surrounded by gardens that gave way to dense forest. In the distance, she could see guards patrolling the perimeter. Is he keeping me prisoner? She asked Maria, who was tidying the already immaculate room. The housekeeper paused. The security isn't to keep you in, child. It's to keep others out. Others? Who? Maria's expression closed off. Mr. Costello has enemies. Many enemies. And why should I be concerned about his enemies? Because now they are your enemies, too. Maria answered simply. She moved toward the door. When you're ready, I'll show you around. This will be easier if you don't think of yourself as a prisoner. What should I think of myself as then? Isabella asked bitterly. Maria considered this for a moment. A guest. Under protection. Left alone. Isabella dressed in the new clothes, which fit perfectly. She brushed her hair, washed her face, and tried to gather her scattered thoughts. She needed to think clearly. Escape seemed impossible, even if she could somehow get past the guards. The mansion was isolated, surrounded by woods. In her wheelchair, she wouldn't get far. A more reasonable approach would be to convince Dominic Costello to let her go. But to do that, she needed to understand why she was here in the first place. What possible interest could a notorious mafia boss have in her? Maria returned and spent the morning showing Isabella around the parts of the mansion she would have access to. It was like touring a small museum, rooms filled with art and antiques, a library with books from floor to ceiling, a conservatory with exotic plants. The housekeeper pointed out which entrances had ramps alongside their steps, which hallways were widest, which rooms had been subtly modified to accommodate her wheelchair. Again, Isabella was struck by the level of thought that had gone into preparing for her arrival. How long has he been planning this? She asked Maria as they entered a solarium filled with morning light where a table was set for lunch. Planning what, child? Bringing me here? These accommodations, they weren't made overnight. Maria's expression revealed nothing. Mr. Costello has owned this house for many years. The accommodations, as you call them, have always been here. Before Isabella could question this further, the solarium doors opened and Dominic himself entered. He looked different in daylight, no, less dangerous, but somehow more human. He wore a simple white shirt with the sleeves rolled up, revealing muscular forearms marked with a few small scars. His dark hair was slightly damp, as if he'd recently showered. "You're awake," he said, his deep voice filling the space between them. "Good. I hope you slept well." The absurdity of this polite inquiry after essentially kidnapping her broke something in Isabella. "Slept well?" she repeated incredulously. "You tear me away from my wedding." "A wedding that was already over?" Dominic interrupted coldly. "Or did you wish to stay and continue being humiliated?" Isabella flinched as if he'd struck her. The memory of Ryan's rejection was still raw, a wound barely hours old. "That wasn't your decision to make," she said, her voice smaller now. "You had no right." Dominic pulled out a chair at the table, sitting across from her. Maria quietly disappeared, leaving them alone. "Perhaps not," he conceded, surprising Isabella. "But it's done. You're here now. Safe." "Safe from what?" "You keep saying that, but you won't explain what danger I'm supposedly in." Dominic's jaw tightened. "The world is full of dangers for someone like you." "Someone like me?" Isabella's eyes flashed with sudden anger. "A cripple? You mean? You think I don't know how vulnerable I am? I've lived with this body my entire life. Mr. Costello, I don't need you to protect me from a world I've already been navigating for 26 years. Something like admiration flickered in Dominic's eyes. "I didn't mean your disability," he said quietly. "I meant someone innocent. Someone good." He looked away, his profile sharp against the bright windows. Goodness doesn't last long in this city without protection. There was a history in those words that Isabella couldn't decipher, a weight of experience that made her anger falter. Before she could respond, Maria returned with lunch, a light meal of soup and sandwiches that under normal circumstances would have been delicious. They ate in uncomfortable silence, Dominic occasionally glancing at her as if checking that she was actually eating. The domesticity of the scene was surreal, sharing a meal with a man whose reputation suggested he'd probably killed people with the same hands, now carefully holding a soup spoon. "The clothes fit well," he observed finally. "Is there anything else you need?" Isabella set down her spoon. "I need to know why I'm here. Real answers, not cryptic comments about safety and protection." Dominic studied her for a long moment, his dark eyes unreadable. "You're here because you have nowhere else to go," he said finally. Your fiancé abandoned you. You have no family. Your friend stood by and watched as you were humiliated. His voice was matter-of-fact, not cruel, but the words stung nonetheless. Here, you have safety, comfort, anything you could want, except freedom, Isabella pointed out. Freedom to do what? Return to an empty apartment? Face the pity and whispers? He leaned forward slightly. Stay. Give it time. When things settle, we can discuss your future. It wasn't really a request, and they both knew it. Dominic Costello wasn't a man accustomed to being refused. Still, something in his tone wasn't as harsh as his words. There was an underlying note that sounded almost like pleading. 1 week, Isabella said suddenly, surprising herself as much as him. I'll stay 1 week without trying to leave or call the police. But you have to be honest with me. No more vague answers. Dominic's eyebrows rose slightly, clearly not expecting negotiation. After a moment, he nodded. 1 week, but some questions I cannot answer. Not yet. It was a strange concession from a man who could simply force her to stay indefinitely. Isabella didn't understand his willingness to compromise, but she seized the opportunity. First question, how do you know me? We've never met, but you knew my name at the church. A muscle in Dominic's jaw twitched. I make it my business to know many things about this city and its people. That's not an answer. Isabella pressed. Why me specifically? I'm nobody important. Dominic's expression softened almost imperceptibly. You are important, he said quietly. Before she could question this, he stood abruptly. I have business to attend to. Maria will see to anything you need. The house and grounds are yours to explore, except for the West Wing. That area is private. The blue beard-like restriction sent a chill down Isabella's spine. What's in the West Wing? My offices. Business matters. His tone made it clear the subject was closed. Dinner is at 7 o'clock. I would appreciate your company if you feel up to it. With that, he was gone, leaving Isabella with more questions than answers and the strange feeling that beneath his controlled exterior, Dominic Costello was a man at war with himself. The remainder of the day passed slowly as Isabella explored the mansion, partly out of curiosity and partly looking for clues to understand her situation. The place was immense, with corridors that seemed to wind back on themselves and rooms whose purposes she couldn't always determine. Despite Dominic's warning, she found herself drawn to the forbidden West Wing, rolling her wheelchair quietly down the hallway that led to that section of the house. She wasn't planning to actually enter, just to see what was so private that it warranted a specific prohibition. As she approached the heavy double doors that presumably led to the restricted area, voices made her pause. Men's voices speaking in low, urgent tones. One was unmistakably Dominic's. The other belonged to Leo Mancini, the scarred man who had accompanied them from the church. Cannot afford to be distracted right now, Leo was saying. The Moretti family is making moves on the south side. They think you've gone soft. Let them think what they want, Dominic replied, his voice hard. It will make their surprise all the greater when I crush them. And the girl? What were you thinking, Dom? Bringing her here? Into the heart of our operation? If they discover who she is to you. Enough. Dominic's voice was sharp as a blade. She stays. She's safer here than anywhere else. The matter is not open for discussion. You risk everything for her, Leo said, his tone softening slightly. At least tell her the truth. She's not ready, Dominic answered, something like pain coloring his words. She doesn't remember. And when she does, there was a pause. She'll hate me for what I've become. Isabella's heart pounded so loudly she was sure they must hear it through the door. Remember? Remember what? She had never met Dominic Costello before yesterday. She would certainly remember encountering such a man. Yet, he spoke as if they shared a history, as if she had forgotten something crucial about him. The sound of footsteps approaching the door startled her into action. She turned her wheelchair as quietly as possible and hurried back down the hallway, turning the corner just as she heard the door open behind her. Her mind raced with questions as she navigated back to safer territory. In her confusion, she took a wrong turn and found herself in a part of the house she hadn't explored with Maria. The hallway was lined with photographs, not the expensive art that decorated the main rooms, but personal photographs in simple frames. Curious, Isabella wheeled closer to examine them. Her breath caught in her throat. There, in a slightly faded photograph, was a group of children standing in front of a grim-looking building. It took her a moment to recognize it, St. Jude's Orphanage, where she had spent 10 years of her childhood after her parents' death. She knew that building intimately its cold stone steps that had made her dependent on caretakers to carry her up and down. The dormitories with beds lined up in perfect rows. The small chapel where they were required to pray each morning and evening. With trembling fingers, Isabella took the frame from the wall and examined it more closely. The children were arranged in a formal line, their faces solemn as children in such places often were. In the back row stood a skinny boy of perhaps 12, dark-haired and serious-eyed, his hand resting protectively on the shoulder of a much smaller child in front of Hema, little girl in a wheelchair. Isabella stared at the image of her younger self, maybe 6 years old, her hair in neat braids, her legs already withered from the condition she'd been born with, and the boy behind her. Dominic, she whispered in shock, finally seeing what she should have recognized immediately. Those same intense eyes, that same strong jawline, though softer in youth. The protective stance behind her wheelchair was all there. Frantically, she examined the other photographs on the wall. There were more from the orphanage, the children in the dining hall, in the courtyard, in class. In every group photo, the same pattern emerged. Young Dominic positioned near young Isabella, always within reaching distance, often with that protective hand on her wheelchair or shoulder. Then there were photos that stirred deeper memories. Isabella and Dominic sitting beneath a tree in the orphanage courtyard, him reading to her from a book. The two of them at what appeared to be a Christmas celebration. Isabella beaming at a small wrapped gift in her lap. Dominic pushing her wheelchair through the snow, both of them bundled in scarves. The final photograph stopped her cold. Isabella, perhaps 10 years old, asleep in her wheelchair, and beside her, the teenage Dominic, no longer skinny, but beginning to show the strength he would later possess. Looking at her with an expression of such tender concern that it made adult Isabella's eyes fill with tears. How had she forgotten him? This boy who had clearly been her protector, her friend, perhaps her only ally in that cold, institutional childhood? She searched her memory desperately, trying to recall the dark-eyed boy who had stood behind her in those photographs. Fragments came back to her, a voice reading stories when she was afraid at night, strong arms lifting her when caretakers couldn't be bothered, a fierce presence that kept the other children from teasing her. But the face remained blurry in her memory, as if hidden behind frosted glass. You weren't supposed to find these. Dominic's voice came from behind her, causing her to nearly drop the frame she was holding. She turned her wheelchair to face him, the photograph still clutched in her hands. Why did you hide this from me? We knew each other at St. Jude's. You were. She struggled to find the words. You protected me. Dominic's face was uncharacteristically vulnerable as he looked at the photograph she held. Yes, he said simply, but I don't remember you. Not clearly. How is that possible? These pictures. She gestured at the wall of photographs. We spent years together. He moved closer, carefully taking the frame from her hands and returning it to its place on the wall. They gave you medication at the orphanage. For pain, they said, but it affected your memory, made the edges blur. And later, it was better that you forget me. Better? How could it be better to forget someone who obviously cared for me? Isabella's voice rose with confusion and hurt. Why didn't you tell me when you saw me at the church? Why this charade of being strangers? Dominic's expression hardened, the vulnerability vanishing behind his customary mask. Because we are strangers now. The boy in these photographs no longer exists. What remains is not someone you should remember fondly. That's for me to decide. Isabella insisted. You owe me the truth. All of it. For a moment, she thought he might refuse, might retreat behind the cold authority he wore so comfortably. Instead, he sighed, suddenly looking weary. Come, he said. If you want the truth, I'll show you where it began. Dominic led Isabella through the mansion to a room she hadn't seen before. A small study with walls lined with books and a desk of dark wood. Unlike the grand library she'd toured earlier, this space felt private, personal. He gestured for her to enter, then closed the door behind them. From a drawer in the desk, he removed a worn leather box. His hands that Isabella now realized had orchestrated violence. Perhaps even death were surprisingly gentle as he opened it. Inside were items that made Isabella's breath catch. A faded ribbon she recognized as once belonging in her hair. A small carved wooden bird. Several folded papers covered in childish handwriting. And at the bottom, a simple bracelet made of braided string. You kept these? She whispered. All these years. Dominic's expression remained guarded, but his eyes held something like pain as he looked at the collection of humble treasures. They were all I took when I left St. Jude's. He picked up the bracelet. The colored strings faded with age. You made this for me for my 14th birthday. You said it would protect me. Isabella stared at the bracelet, a memory surfacing like a bubble breaking the water surface. She had made it secretly, working on it at night when the other children were asleep, determined to give him something special because he had always protected her, always made sure she had enough food, always carried her up the stairs when her arms were too tired to manage with the crutches they sometimes made her use for her own good. Dommy, she said suddenly, the childhood nickname coming to her lips unbidden. That's what I called you. Not Dominic. Dommy. His eyes widened slightly at the name, a name Isabella realized no one had called him in a very long time. Yes, he said softly. No one's called me that since. Since you left, Isabella finished for him. You disappeared. One day you were there, and then, she frowned, trying to piece together the fragmented memories. They told me you ran away, that you abandoned the orphanage. Abandoned me. Dominic's jaw tightened. They lied. Then what happened? Isabella demanded. Why did you leave me alone there? He set the box aside and moved to look out the window, his back to her, hands clasped behind him. I was 14, he began, his voice distant as if reciting a story about someone else. The director of St. Jude's, Father Michael. You remember him? Isabella nodded, though Dominic couldn't see the gesture. She remembered the stern, cold man who ran the orphanage like a prison. He had arrangements with certain men in the city. Dominic continued. Men who were looking for young boys to employ. His voice hardened. Boys who wouldn't be missed. Boys with no families to ask questions. Isabella's hand flew to her mouth as she understood the implication. He was selling children? Not selling. Placing in apprenticeships was the official term. Dominic's voice was bitter. I had caught his attention because I was strong, defiant, the kind who might survive on the streets. He called me to his office that day and told me I would be leaving with a man named Sal Genovese, a businessman who needed young men with potential. He turned back to face Isabella, his expression a complex mixture of old rage and resignation. I knew what kind of business Genovese was in. Everyone in the orphanage whispered about the boys who left with him and came back years later driving expensive cars, wearing gold watches. If they came back at all. The mafia, Isabella whispered. He was recruiting for the mafia. Dominic nodded. I told Father Michael I wouldn't go, that I needed to stay at St. Jude's. He laughed. He said I had no choice. His eyes found Isabella's. I told him I couldn't leave because I had to protect you. Tears welled in Isabella's eyes at the thought of that 14-year-old boy standing up to authority for her sake. Father Michael found that very amusing. Dominic continued, his voice hardening. He said if I refused to go with Genovese, he would make arrangements for you instead. Not with Genovese, of course, but there were other business associates who might find uses for a pretty little crippled girl. Isabella felt ill at the casual cruelty, the terrible threat leveled at a child. So you went? She said quietly. To protect me. I went. Dominic confirmed. But first, I made Father Michael swear that you would be left alone, that no arrangements would ever be made for you. I threatened him. A 14-year-old boy threatening a grown man. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. But he believed me. He saw something in me even then. Something that scared him. What did you threaten him with? Isabella asked. Dominic's eyes darkened. I told him that if anything happened to you, if you were ever hurt or sent away, I would come back one day and burn St. Jude's to the ground with him inside it. The cold certainty in his voice sent a shiver down Isabella's spine. She had no doubt the boy Dominic had meant every word, just as the man before her would be capable of carrying out such a threat now. So you left to save me, she said softly. But why didn't you tell me? Why let me believe you'd abandon me? Pain flickered across Dominic's face. I was 14. Isabella, being taken to work for one of the most dangerous crime families in the city. Which I have told you, that I was going to become a criminal to keep you safe, that I might never see you again? He shook his head. It was better that you forget me. Better that you hate me for leaving than know the truth. Isabella wheeled her chair closer to him, looking up at the man who had once been her childhood protector. What happened to you with Genovese? Dominic's expression closed off slightly. I learned the business. I was good at it. Strong. Smart. Willing to do whatever was necessary to survive. He spoke dispassionately, as if describing someone else's life. Genovese became a father to me. In his way, taught me everything he knew. And when he was killed 7 years ago, I took over his territory and built it into something bigger. Into the notorious reputation of Dominic Costello. Isabella said, the piece is making more sense now. You became the most feared man in the city. Fear keeps you alive in my world. Dominic said simply. Then more softly, I kept track of you. Made sure you were safe. That you had opportunities. When you left St. Jude's at 18, I arranged for the apartment you thought was a stroke of luck. The scholarship to community college. The job that seemed to fall into your lap. Isabella's mind reeled at this revelation. Her entire adult life, the independence she had fought for and been so proud of, had been silently orchestrated by the man standing before her. You've been watching me all this time? Protecting you, Dominic corrected, from a distance, as I promised that day. But you never showed yourself, never spoke to me. There was hurt in her voice now. Until yesterday. Why now? Dominic? Why come for me at the church after all these years of shadows and secrets? Dominic's composure cracked slightly. A flash of the raw emotion he normally kept so carefully concealed. Because I saw you crying, he said simply. Because that man, who should have treasured you, humiliated you in front of everyone. And I remembered a promise I made to a little girl in a wheelchair 20 years ago. What promise? Isabella asked, though part of her already knew the answer. That no one would ever hurt you again. Dominic said, his voice rough with feeling. Not while I lived. The silence that followed was heavy with 2 decades of separation. Protection, secrets, and sacrifice. Isabella looked at the man before her, trying to reconcile the dangerous mafia boss with the boy who had once read her stories and defended her from bullies. Both were real. Both were Dominic. So now what? She asked finally. You've rescued me from humiliation and brought me to your fortress. Is this how it ends? Me living here as your what? Ward? Responsibility? Prisoner? Dominic's expression softened in a way she suspected few people ever witnessed. None of those things. Isabella, you're free to leave whenever you wish. I would provide you with anything you need: a new home, financial security, whatever would make you happy. My protection would continue, but from a distance, as before. Then why bring me here at all? Isabella pressed. Why not simply help me leave the church and set me up somewhere new? Dominic hesitated, something vulnerable passing across his features. Because for one selfish moment, when I saw you there in that white dress, tears on your face, I wanted. He stopped, visibly struggling with words that didn't come easily to him. I wanted to remember what it felt like to protect you up close. Not from the shadows. Just once more. The admission cost him. Isabella could see that. This man who commanded an empire built on fear and violence, who had likely ordered deaths and orchestrated criminal enterprises, was laid bare by this simple confession of wanting to recapture a connection long lost. Before she could respond, a sharp knock interrupted the moment. The door opened to reveal Leo Mancini, his scarred face grim. Boss, we have a situation. The Moretti shipment. Our men were ambushed at the docks. 3 dead, 2 critical. Dominic's entire demeanor changed in an instant, the vulnerability vanishing behind a mask of cold fury. Who? He demanded. Definitely Moretti's crew. They left their mark. Leo's eyes flickered briefly to Isabella, clearly uncomfortable discussing business in front of her. Prepare the car, Dominic ordered, already moving toward the door. Full team. Armed. He paused, looking back at Isabella with an expression caught between two worlds: the boy who had protected her and the man who commanded fear. We'll finish this conversation later, he said quietly. Stay inside. Tell Maria to activate emergency protocols. With that, he was gone, leaving Isabella alone with a box of childhood treasures and the weight of revelations too heavy to immediately process. Through the window, she watched as a convoy of black SUVs roared down the driveway, carrying Dominic and his men toward violence she could only imagine. Maria appeared minutes later, her usual composed demeanor slightly strained. Cool me, child, she said gently but urgently. When there's trouble, we move to the secure rooms. Trouble? Isabella asked, following the housekeeper down a hallway she hadn't explored before. Is it dangerous here? Maria's expression was grim. Mr. Costello has enemies. Today, they have made a move against him. It is unlikely they would attack the house. But we take no chances. She led Isabella to what appeared to be a normal bedroom until she pressed a hidden panel, revealing a reinforced door. These rooms are secure. Bulletproof glass. Reinforced walls. Like a fortress within a fortress. Inside was a comfortable sitting area, a bedroom, and a small kitchenette, all designed for extended stays if necessary. Television screens showed security camera feeds from around the property. How often does this happen? Isabella asked, wheeling herself to the window, which looked out onto the gardens, but was, as Maria had said, clearly made of thick, bulletproof glass. Not often, Maria replied, checking that the secure room was properly stocked. Mr. Costello usually prevents threats before they become actions. This attack, it is unusual, bold. Isabella watched the older woman's methodical movements. You've worked for him a long time, haven't you? Maria nodded. Since he first acquired this house. 10 years ago. He was very young then, just beginning to build his empire, but already formidable. Did you know? Isabella asked. About me? About our history? Maria paused in her tasks, regarding Isabella with careful assessment. He told me there was a girl from his childhood who must be protected at all costs. That accommodations should always be ready for someone in a wheelchair, should the need arise. Her expression softened slightly. I have worked for dangerous men most of my life, Miss Isabella, but I've never seen one keep childhood treasures in a box on his desk. Never seen one look at old photographs with such longing. He's a criminal, Isabella said, more to herself than to Maria. He hurts people, probably kills them. Yes, Maria answered simply. He is those things, but he is also the boy who protected you. Both are true. Hours passed with no word from Dominic. Isabella watched the security feeds, seeing guards patrol the property with heightened alertness. Weapons visible now. Maria brought food and attempted to distract her with conversation. But Isabella's thoughts were fixed on Dominic, on the boy she barely remembered, and the dangerous man he had become. It was past midnight when the security cameras showed the convoy of SUVs returning. Isabella's heart clenched as she watched Dominic emerge from the lead vehicle, his white shirt now stained with what could only be blood. He moved stiffly, one hand pressed to his side, while Leo and the others formed a protective circle around him. He's hurt, Isabella gasped, turning to Maria. The housekeeper was already moving toward the door. Stay here, she ordered. I will check on him and let you know. Left alone, Isabella paced the secure room as best she could in her wheelchair, circling the space again and again as minutes stretched unbearably. Finally, the door opened to reveal Maria, her usual composed expression troubled. He is being seen by the doctor, she reported. A bullet grazed his side. Not serious, but he lost blood. I want to see him, Isabella said immediately. Maria hesitated. He is not in a state to receive visitors. When men like Mr. Costello return from battle, they are not always themselves. I don't care, Isabella insisted. Take me to him. Perhaps seeing the determination in her eyes, Maria finally nodded. Very well, but do not be shocked by what you see. This is his world. Miss Isabella, this is who he is now. She led Isabella through the mansion to what appeared to be a medical suite, another room she hadn't been shown on her tour. Outside the door stood Tony Gallo, the younger man who had accompanied them from the church. His face was spattered with blood, though he appeared uninjured. His eyes widened slightly at the sight of Isabella. She wants to see him, Maria explained. Is the doctor finished? Tony nodded. Just left. Boss is in a mood. He won't take the painkillers. Maria sighed as if this was a familiar battle. Of course not. Stubborn as always. She turned to Isabella. I'll wait here. Call if you need me. Isabella took a deep breath and pushed open the door. The room beyond was clinically bright, equipped like a small emergency room. Dominic sat shirtless on an examination table, his muscular torso marked with old scars and fresh bruises. A white bandage was wrapped around his lower ribs, a small spot of red seeping through. His knuckles were raw and bloody, his face sporting a cut above one eyebrow. He looked up as she entered, surprise briefly replacing the cold fury in his eyes. You shouldn't be here, he said, his voice rough with pain and something darker. Not when I'm like this. Isabella wheeled closer, taking in the evidence of violence on his body. This was the reality of his life. The physical cost of the path he had chosen her that had been chosen for him at 14. What happened? She asked quietly. Dominic's laugh was harsh, without humor. Business? He replied. A competitor thought I was distracted, vulnerable. They were mistaken. His eyes held a dangerous gleam. They won't make that mistake again. The implication was clear, and Isabella felt a chill at the casual reference to what must have been brutal violence. You're hurt, she said instead, focusing on the immediate concern. It's nothing, Dominic dismissed, though his rigid posture betrayed the pain he was in. A scratch. Isabella moved closer still, stopping directly in front of him. From her seated position in the wheelchair, she had to look up to meet his gaze. You've been protecting me for 20 years, she said quietly. Maybe it's time someone looked after you for a change. Something vulnerable flickered in Dominic's eyes before he could mask it. I don't need looking after. Everyone does. Isabella responded simply. She reached for a clean cloth on the nearby medical tray, dampened it, and gently began cleaning the dried blood from his knuckles. He flinched to the contact, not from pain, but from the gentleness, as if kindness was more difficult to bear than violence. Why are you doing this? He asked, watching her tend to his wounds with a mixture of confusion and guarded emotion. Isabella continued her careful ministrations, moving from his hands to the cut above his eyebrow. Because 20 years ago, a boy named Dami cleaned my scrapes when I fell from my wheelchair, she said softly. Because he read to me when I was scared and made sure I had enough to eat and threatened to burn down an orphanage if anyone hurt me. Dominic remained still under her touch, his breathing measured. That boy is gone. Isabella. No, she contradicted gently. He's right here, wounded and dangerous and changed, but still keeping his promise. She set aside the cloth and looked up at him, really looked at the man he had become. I remember now. Not everything, but enough. I remember feeling safe when you were near. I remember crying for days after you disappeared. Dominic's composure fractured slightly. Pain that had nothing to do with his physical injuries crossing his features. I never wanted to leave you, he admitted, his voice barely audible. You were the only pure thing in my life. And now? Isabella asked. What am I to you now? Dominic? His dark eyes met hers, naked truth in them for perhaps the first time since she'd arrived. Everything, he said simply. The reason for all of it. Every terrible thing I've done. Every life I've taken. Every empire I've built. It was all to become powerful enough that no one would ever threaten you again. To become someone who could protect you completely, even if from a distance. The weight of his confession hung in the air between them. 20 years of violence and power, all circling back to a promise made to a little girl in a wheelchair. I never asked for that sacrifice, Isabella whispered. It wasn't a sacrifice, Dominic responded, his voice finding strength. It was a choice. My choice. And I would make it again. Isabella reached up, hesitating for just a moment before gently touching his face. Feeling the stubble along his jaw, he went completely still at the contact, like a wild animal and used to gentle handling. You've protected me all these years, she said. But who protected you? Dami? Who tended your wounds and kept you safe? Something broke in Dominic's carefully maintained control. He closed his eyes briefly, leaning ever so slightly into her touch. No one, he answered. That's not how my world works. Maybe your world needs to change, Isabella suggested softly. Dominic opened his eyes, a hint of his earlier hardness returning. My world is what keeps you safe. What happened today, this is the reality of the protection I provide. Men died. I killed them. That doesn't change because you remember a boy who read you stories. I know that, Isabella said, withdrawing her hand. I'm not naive enough to think you'll suddenly abandon the life you've built. But maybe you don't have to keep me at such a distance anymore. She held his gaze steadily. Maybe we both need to remember what it feels like to have someone care whether we live or die. Dominic studied her face, searching for something judgment, perhaps, or fear. Finding neither, he seemed to reach a decision. Stay, he said simply, not as a prisoner or a ward. Not out of obligation or debt. Just stay. For a while. Until we both figure out what this is now. It wasn't a declaration of love or even friendship. It was an offer of time. Time to rediscover a connection buried under years of separation and transformation. Time to reconcile the boy from the photographs with the dangerous man before her. Time to decide if there was a place in her life for Dominic Costello. Not just as a shadow protector, but as something more tangible. I'll stay, Isabella agreed softly. For a while, relief flickered across Dominic's face, quickly masked by his usual control. But Isabella had seen it, had seen the vulnerability beneath the armor of violence and power. The boy named Dami still lived somewhere inside the feared mafia boss. And perhaps that was enough to begin with. The days that followed established a strange new rhythm in the mansion. Dominic's injury forced him to remain home more than usual, creating opportunities for him and Isabella to cautiously rebuild a connection that had been severed 20 years ago. They share meals, often sitting in comfortable silence or engaged in careful conversation that avoided the violence of his world while exploring safer topics. Books he remembered she had loved as a child. Changes in the city over the years. Her studies in college. Isabella discovered that beneath his fearsome reputation, Dominic possessed a sharp intelligence and unexpected knowledge of literature, art, and history. Self-taught through voracious reading, he explained that in his position, appearing cultured and educated was as important as appearing dangerous. But Isabella sensed it was more than just appearance. He genuinely sought knowledge, perhaps as a way to rise above his violent circumstances. For his part, Dominic seemed to draw a careful line between his business and his time with Isabella. He still disappeared for hours to his office in the West Wing, emerging sometimes with that cold hardness in his eyes that spoke of difficult decisions and brutal orders. But when he was with her, he made visible efforts to leave that world at the door. A week passed. Then two. The terms of their original agreement had expired, but neither mentioned it. Isabella no longer felt like a prisoner or even a guest. She had begun to feel strangely at home. One evening they sat in the library, Dominic reading aloud from a collection of Russian folk delesteries he had once recited to her from memory in the orphanage dormitory when nightmares kept her awake. His deep voice gave the ancient tales a resonance that transported Isabella back to those childhood moments when his words had been her only comfort. "I used to think you made those stories up," she said when he paused between tales. "They seemed too perfect, too magical to be real." Dominic's lips curved in a small, rare smile. "I may have embellished them a bit, changed endings that were too grim. A child who had already seen too much sadness deserved happier stories." Isabella studied him in the warm lamplight. The cut above his eyebrow had healed, but the dangerous aura never fully disappeared. It clung to him like a second skin, visible in the alert way he sat. The careful positioning that kept him between her and the door, the occasional glances toward the windows, always protecting, always vigilant. "Did you have anyone to tell you stories?" she asked softly, "after you left St. Jude's?" Something darkened in Dominic's expression. Genovese didn't believe in stories. He believed in lessons. Hard ones. He closed the book, setting it aside. "But I remember the tales. Sometimes, in the worst moments, I would recite them to myself. Remember the little girl who believed in magic and happy endings." A shadow of pain crossed his features. "It kept me human when everything around me pushed for something else." Isabella moved her wheelchair closer to where he sat. Over the past weeks, she had become adept at navigating the mansion, which she now realized had been designed with her mobility in mind from the beginning testament to Dominic's long-held hope that she might someday be here. "You said once that I wouldn't want to know what you became," she said carefully. "But I think I do know, Dominic. I've seen enough now. And yes, there's darkness there, violence and power that frightens me sometimes. But there's also the boy who protected me, who sacrificed his own innocence for mine, who kept childhood treasures in a box for 20 years. Dominic's expression remained guarded, but his eyes held vulnerability he rarely allowed anyone to see. "The things I've done, Isabella, they can't be undone, can't be forgiven. I'm not offering forgiveness," Isabella replied gently. "Forgiveness implies judgment, and I haven't lived your life. I can't judge the choices you made after they took you from St. Jude's." She reached for his hand, covering it with her own. I'm offering understanding, acceptance of all of the boy and the man, the protector and the predator. Dominic looked down at their joined hands, his larger one remaining perfectly still beneath her touch, as if he feared any movement might cause her to withdraw. Why? He asked, his voice rough with suppressed emotion. Why would you accept any part of this? Of me? Isabella's answer was simple. Because you never stopped seeing me as whole, not broken or pitiful or in need of fixing. Just someone to be protected, equal in value, if different in circumstance. She squeezed his hand gently. Do you know how rare that is? Most people look at the wheelchair first. Me second. You always saw me first. The vulnerability in Dominic's eyes deepened, a crack in the armor he had built over decades. I never pitied you because I knew your strength, he said quietly. Even as a child, you had more courage than anyone at St. Jude's, more kindness in a world that showed you none. His voice dropped lower. When Genovese was teaching me to be ruthless, I would think of you, how you smiled despite everything, how you never grew hard or bitter. It haunted me, made me keep a part of myself locked away, untouched by what I was becoming. The distance between them seemed to shrink in that moment. 20 years of separation collapsing under the weight of shared understanding. Isabella saw in Dominic's eyes something beyond protection or obligation, something warmer, deeper, and much more frightening in its intensity. Before either could acknowledge the shifting current between them, the library door burst open. Leo Mancini stood there, his scarred face tense with urgency. Boss, he said sharply, we have confirmation. Moretti is moving against the Eastern Territory tonight. Our men are in position, but they need direction. The transformation was immediate and complete. The vulnerability in Dominic's eyes vanished, replaced by cold calculation as he rose to his feet. Prepare the secure room for Isabella, he ordered. Double the house guards. No one enters or leaves the property without direct authorization from me. Already done, Leo confirmed. The car is waiting. Dominic turned to Isabella, his expression now that of the mafia boss rather than the man who had been reading folktales moments before. I have to go, he said, his voice clipped. Stay with Maria. The secure room. I know the protocol. Isabella interrupted gently. I'll be safe. Be careful. Dami. The childhood name seemed to pause him for a heartbeat. A flicker of the unguarded man, briefly visible before the armor, closed completely. He nodded once, then strode from the room, already issuing rapid orders to Leo as they moved toward the West Wing. Hours later, Isabella sat in the secure room with Maria, watching the security feeds as they had 2 weeks earlier. The older woman knitted calmly, seemingly accustomed to these tense nights, while Isabella could barely contain her anxiety. Somewhere in the city, Dominic was engaged in what was certainly violent, possibly lethal confrontation. Does it get easier? She asked Maria, waiting like this, not knowing. The housekeeper's knitting needles continued their steady rhythm. No, she answered honestly, but you learn to have faith. Mr. Costello is careful, strategic. He does not take unnecessary risks. But tonight is different. Isabella pressed. I could see it in Leo's face, in Dominic's reaction. Maria's hands finally stilled. Yes, she admitted. Moretti is a particular enemy, more personal than business. There is history. What kind of history? The older woman hesitated, clearly weighing how much to reveal. Moretti was once Mr. Costello's mentor after Genovese was killed. He taught him, trusted him, then betrayed him in a power play that nearly cost Mr. Costello his life. Maria's expression darkened with the memory. It was the closest I've ever seen him to death. 3 bullets. He spent weeks recovering in this very house, planning his revenge. And did he get it? His revenge? Isabella asked quietly. Not completely, Maria replied. He took back his territory, expanded it, but Moretti escaped, went underground. He's been a shadow in Mr. Costello's world ever since. Appearing, causing damage, disappearing again. She resumed her knitting. Tonight, perhaps they'll end it one way or another. The weight of this history hung heavily in the secure room as midnight passed. Then 1 a.m. With no word from Dominic, Isabella tried to distract herself with books, with television, but her thoughts remained fixed on a man who had re-entered her life so dramatically. It was nearly 3 o'clock in the morning when the security feed showed movement at the gates. A single black SUV approaching rapidly. The guards verified its occupants, then waved it through. Isabella watched tensely as it sped up the driveway to the mansion's entrance. He's back, she said, relief flooding her voice. Maria set aside her knitting and moved to the security screen, her expression changing as she watched Dominic emerge from the vehicle alone, moving with visible urgency. Something is wrong, she said sharply. He would not return without Leo unless... The secure room phone rang. Cutting her off, Maria answered it immediately, her face paling as she listened. Yes, she said. Right away. She hung up and turned to Isabella, her usual composure shaken. We must go. Mr. Costello needs us in his office immediately. What's happened? Isabella asked, already wheeling toward the door. Moretti, Maria replied grimly. He knows about you. Dominic's office in the West Wing was a space Isabella had never entered before, a large room dominated by a massive desk, walls lined with monitors showing various locations throughout the city. Maps were spread across a table, marked with notations she couldn't decipher. The air smelled faintly of gunpowder and Dominic's expensive cologne. He stood at the window, still wearing the same clothes he'd left an hours earlier, though now they showed signs of a physical confrontation. When he turned at their entrance, Isabella was struck by the raw fury in his expression, not cold calculation now, but white-hot rage barely contained. Sit, he ordered, gesturing to a space near his desk where Isabella could position her wheelchair. Maria, seal the house. Full lockdown. No one enters or leaves, including staff. Arm the perimeter defenses. The housekeeper nodded and moved to a panel on the wall, inputting a code that presumably activated whatever security measures Dominic had installed. Isabella heard distant sounds of metal shutters descending over windows. Electronic locks engaging. What's happening? She asked, watching Dominic pace the room like a caged predator. Maria said Moretti knows about me. Knows what? Dominic stopped pacing, his hands clenching into fists. Everything, he bit out. Who you are to me. Your connection to St. Jude's. The fact that you're here. His eyes met hers, blazing with fury and something that looked almost like fear. We had Moretti cornered tonight. Nearly finished it. Then he smiled and asked how my little crippled orphan was enjoying my hospitality. Isabella flinched at the cruel description, but focused on the implications. He was baiting you. Yes, Dominic acknowledged grimly. And it worked. I hesitated, just for a second. It was enough for him to escape. He slammed a fist down on his desk. Stupid. Amateur. Emotional. So, he knows about me. Isabella said, trying to remain calm. Why the extreme response? The lockdown? Dominic's expression darkened further. Because Moretti doesn't just fight his enemies. He destroys everything they care about first. Everyone they love. His voice caught almost imperceptibly on the last word. He's coming for you. Isabella. To hurt me through you. The reality of her situation crashed down with sudden clarity. This wasn't an abstract danger. It was specific, targeted, and deadly. For the first time since arriving at the mansion, Isabella felt genuine fear. What do we do? she asked, her voice steadier than she expected. Dominic seemed surprised by her question, perhaps expecting panic or accusations instead. We prepare, he answered. The mansion is the most secure location possible. Guards, electronic security, reinforced structure. But we can't stay on lockdown forever. He moved to the wall of monitors, checking various camera feeds. Leo and most of our men are still in the city, containing the situation there. They'll return by morning to strengthen our position here. And then what? Isabella pressed. Wait for this Moretti to attack. Hope your security is enough. Dominic's expression hardened with resolve. No. Once our position is secure, I go hunting. End this once and for all. With me as bait. Isabella said quietly. His head snapped toward her. No. Never. You remain here. Protected. No matter what. But he'll expect that. Isabella argued. If he knows you as well as Maria implied. He'll know you'll lock me away somewhere safe. He'll plan for that. Dominic studied her with newfound assessment. You're thinking strategically. I'm thinking about survival. Isabella corrected. Mine and yours. I may not know this world, Dominic, but I'm not naive. If this man is as dangerous as you say, then conventional protection might not be enough. A hint of respect flickered in Dominic's eyes. What are you suggesting? Isabella took a deep breath, gathering her courage. Use me, she said simply, not as passive bait, but as an active part of whatever plan you create. He expects you to hide me away. He expects me to be weak, helpless, a little crippled orphan who needs protection. Let's use those expectations against him. Dominic's expression darkened. Absolutely not. I didn't protect you for 20 years to put you directly in danger now. You protected me so I could live. Dominic, Isabella said firmly. Not so I could hide. I've spent my entire life proving I'm not defined by this wheelchair. Don't ask me to be a passive victim now. Their eyes locked in silent battle. Dominic's protective fury against Isabella's determined resolve. It was Maria who broke the tense silence. She has a point. Mr. Costello, the housekeeper said quietly. Moretti will expect conventional protection. He knows how you think. Your instinct to shield rather than involve. Dominic's jaw clenched. This isn't a debate. Isabella stays secure. Hidden. He moved to the desk, spreading out a map of the property. We'll establish a perimeter here. When Leo returns with the men, we'll have enough firepower to what? Isabella interrupted. Start a war on your own property? How many of your men will die for that strategy? She wheeled closer to the desk, forcing Dominic to acknowledge her. I'm not asking to fight, Dominic. I'm asking to be part of the solution instead of being the problem. The muscle in Dominic's jaw twitched as he struggled with conflicting instincts. The strategist who recognized the logic in her argument versus the protector who couldn't bear the thought of putting her at risk. Moretti doesn't know you, he finally said, his voice low and intense. The real you. He sees a weakness to exploit, not a strength to fear. That's his mistake. Isabella felt a surge of hope at this partial concession. Then let's use his mistake. Together. Dominic studied her face for a long moment, seeing determination where he'd expected fear. Finally, he nodded once. A sharp, reluctant gesture. We plan together. He agreed. But your safety remains non-negotiable. If at any point the risk becomes too great, you'll do what you think is necessary to protect me. Isabella finished for him, a small smile touching her lips. As you always have. The tension in the room shifted, the dynamic between them recalibrating. For perhaps the first time, Dominic was seeing her not just as someone to be protected, but as a partner in that protection, still unequal in physical strength, but equal in determination and courage. Dawn broke over the mansion as they finalized their plan. Dominic reluctantly incorporating Isabella's suggestions while Maria brought coffee and made her own strategic contributions. By the time Leo Mancini returned with the rest of Dominic's men, they had developed a strategy that used Moretti's assumptions against Hima's strategy that gave Isabella a crucial role while maintaining the protection Dominic insisted upon. For 3 days, the mansion remained on high alert. Isabella stayed within its walls but refused to be confined to the secure room. Instead, moving about the main floor under guard, visible through windows, presenting herself as the vulnerable target Moretti would expect. Dominic barely slept, dividing his time between security operations and Isabella's side, his protective instincts visibly at war with the strategic necessity of their plan. On the third night, as Isabella sat reading in the library, positioned as planned near the windows where she would be visible from certain angles outside the property, Dominic joined her. He moved differently when preparing for conflict. She had noticed a contained energy that made him seem larger, more dangerous, even in stillness. Leo spotted Moretti's advance team at the perimeter. He said without preamble, "They're testing our defenses, looking for weaknesses. It begins tonight." Isabella closed her book, her heart racing despite her determination to remain calm. "Then we're ready," she said, projecting more confidence than she felt. Dominic studied her face, his own expression unusually open. "You can still change your mind," he said quietly. "We can move you to the panic room, fly you out of the country. You don't have to be part of this." Isabella wheeled closer to him, reaching for his hand. He allowed the contact, his larger hand enveloping hers with careful strength. "I'm already part of this," she replied gently. "I've been since you lifted me from that wheelchair at the church. Maybe since you stood behind me in that orphanage photograph 20 years ago." She squeezed his hand. "We faced this together, Domi." Something powerful moved across Dominic's features. An emotion too complex to name, born of 20 years of separation and protection in the strange, intense connection that had reformed between them these past weeks. "If anything happens to you," he began. "It won't," Isabella interrupted, "because you won't let it. And neither will I." Dominic raised their joined hands, pressing his lips briefly to her knuckles in a gesture that seemed to surprise them both. "When this is over," he said, his voice rough with suppressed emotion, "we need to talk. About this. Us. Whatever this is becoming." Before Isabella could respond, Leo Mancini appeared in the doorway, his expression grim. "Movement at the eastern perimeter," he reported. "They've disabled the first layer of security." Silently, professionally, Dominic released Isabella's hand, his demeanor shifting instantly to that of a commander. "Begin phase 1, he ordered. "Isabella, remain here as planned. 2 guards outside the door. Communication open at all times." He turned to her, his face now the mask of the mafia boss. "Remember?" "I remember," she assured him. "I know what to do." With a final nod, Dominic left with Leo, moving toward what would certainly be violence. Isabella positioned her wheelchair exactly as planned, visible from the windows, appearing vulnerable and alone despite the guards outside the door and the communication device hidden in her pocket. Hours passed in tense silence. The mansion seemed preternaturally quiet, occasionally broken by the soft crackle of the communication device as Dominic or Leo relayed terse updates. The perimeter had been breached at 2 points. Men were in position, waiting. Then, suddenly, chaos erupted. The sound of gunfire echoed from the east side of the property. Through the communication device, Isabella heard shouts, orders, the sounds of conflict. This was no longer theoretical. Men were fighting, perhaps dying, because of her presence here. A massive explosion shook the mansion, causing books to tumble from shelves around her. The lights flickered, then stabilized. Through the device, she heard Dominic cursing. "Diversion," he shouted to his men. "They're coming from the west." Leo, Take 5 men, and the communication cut off. Isabella's heart raced as she tried to re-establish connection. Following the protocol they had established. No response. Something had gone wrong. She heard commotion outside the library door, the sounds of struggle. Then silence. This wasn't part of the plan. The door burst open and 2 men she didn't recognize entered. Not Dominic's guards, who should have been positioned outside. Well, the first man said, smiling unpleasantly as he took in Isabella in her wheelchair. Mr. Costello's little treasure. Right where we expected. Isabella fought to control her fear, her hands gripping the armrests of her wheelchair. These men worked for Moretti. That much was obvious. They weren't here to kill her. At least not immediately. According to Dominic, Moretti preferred to take his enemies' loved ones to make them suffer before delivering the final blow. That knowledge was terrifying, but also crucial to the plan. What have you done with the guards? She demanded, forcing strength into her voice. The man laughed. They're taking a nap. Permanently. He gestured to his companion. Grab her. Moretti wants her undamaged for now. The second man moved toward Isabella, reaching for her wheelchair. She shrank back, playing the part of the frightened, helpless victim they expected, hiding her hand as it slipped to the side of her chair and pressed the hidden button Dominic had installed. Immediately, the library doors slammed shut behind the intruders, heavy metal bolts sliding into place. The men spun around, suddenly alert to the trap. From panels in the ceiling, gas began to hiss into the room, not lethal. Dominic had assured her, but enough to render anyone unconscious within seconds. Isabella pulled the small oxygen mask from its hiding place beneath her wheelchair cushion, quickly placing it over her face as the men realized their predicament. They rushed for the doors, pounding uselessly against the reinforced wood, then turned back toward her with fury. You bitch! The first man snarled, lunging toward her even as the gas began to affect him. You knew. He never finished the sentence. His eyes rolled back and he collapsed to the floor, his companion following seconds later. Isabella breathed steadily through the mask, waiting the full 2 minutes Dominic had instructed before the gas would dissipate through the ventilation system. The plan had worked partially. These men were neutralized, but she had lost communication with Dominic. That wasn't supposed to happen. Something had gone wrong elsewhere in the operation. The library doors unlocked with a heavy click. Isabella tensed, not knowing who would enter Dominic's men or more of Moretti's. She reached beneath her chair again, this time retrieving the small pistol Dominic had reluctantly provided after hours of argument and firearms training. The door opened slowly to reveal Leo Mancini, blood streaming from a cut on his forehead, but very much alive. Relief flooded through Isabella as she lowered the gun. It worked, he said, eyeing the unconscious men with satisfaction. Good. We need to move you now. The mansion is compromised. Where's Dominic? Isabella asked immediately, following Leo as he held the door for her wheelchair. Leo's expression hardened. Moretti was smarter than we anticipated. The Western attack was another diversion. He personally led a team through an underground access point we didn't know existed. He checked the hallway before continuing. The boss went after him directly. Order me to get you to the secondary location. Fear gripped Isabella's heart. He's facing Moretti alone? That wasn't the plan. Plans change in battle. Leo replied grimly. We can't help him if you're not secure. That's his priority. And now it's mine. He tapped his earpiece. Tony, east entrance. Now. Package is secure, but needs transport. Leo. Wait. Isabella called as Tony Gallo took control of her wheelchair. Dominic will kill me if anything happens to you. Leo finished grimly. Go. I'll find him. Tony pushed her wheelchair quickly down a ramp and through a side entrance she hadn't known existed, leading to what appeared to be a hidden tunnel beneath the property. They moved rapidly through the dimly lit passage, the sounds of conflict fading behind them. Where does this lead? Isabella asked, trying to orient herself. Secondary safe house. Tony replied tersely. 2 kilometers from the main property. Underground the whole way. Boss had it built 5 years ago as an escape route. Of course. He did. Isabella thought. Dominic planned for every contingency, every possible threat. Yet somehow, Moretti had still managed to surprise him. To find an access point even Dominic hadn't known about. The thought chilled her. They emerged from the tunnel into what appeared to be a small, but well-equipped bunk-era fraction of the size of the mansion, but secure and stocked with supplies. Tony immediately moved to lock down the entrance and check the perimeter security. Now we wait, he explained, setting up surveillance monitors. Protocol is clear. No communication until the boss or Leo arrives. Too risky. Isabella stared at the monitors, which showed various angles of the exterior, a clearing surrounded by dense forest. The bunker itself disguised as a hunting cabin. There was no view of the mansion, no way to know what was happening there. And if they don't arrive? She asked quietly. Tony's young face hardened with determination. The boss always has a backup plan. Always. He tapped a hidden panel, revealing a safe. If we don't hear from them within 24 hours, there are instructions here. Passports, money, new identities. His confidence wavered slightly. But it won't come to that. The boss has faced worse than Moretti. Isabella wasn't sure that was true. Based on what Maria had told her, Moretti represented something different, not just a business rival, but a personal betrayal. A man who knew Dominic's weaknesses because he had helped shape his strengths. Hours passed in tense silence. Tony remained vigilant, checking and rechecking security, occasionally peering at the monitors. Isabella tried to calm her racing thoughts, to have faith in Dominic's abilities. But fear grew with each passing hour of silence. It was past midnight when the perimeter alarm beeped softly. Tony immediately tensed, hand moving to his weapon as he checked the monitors. Movement in the trees. He reported. Single figure. Approaching slowly. He squinted at the screen. It's the boss. Relief flooded his voice. He made it. Isabella moved to the monitor, her heart leaping at the sight of Dominic emerging from the forest. But something was wrong. He was moving awkwardly, one arm held close to his body, his usual fluid grace absent. He's injured, she said urgently. Open the door. Tony hesitated. Protocol says. Open it. Isabella insisted. Now. Perhaps hearing the desperation in her voice. Tony complied, unlocking the series of security measures that sealed the bunker. The outer door swung open to reveal Dominic standing unsteadily in the doorway. Isabella gasped at the sight of him. His clothing was torn and bloodied, his face marked with cuts and bruises. He clutched his left side, where dark blood seeped between his fingers. But what struck her most was his expressiona combination of pain, exhaustion, and something that looked almost like peace. Isabella, he breathed, his voice rough. You're safe. Dominic, she cried, wheeling toward him as Tony rushed to support his weight. What happened? Where's Moretti? Where's Leo? Dominic allowed Tony to help him to a chair, grimacing with pain as he sat. Leo is securing what's left of the mansion, he said, his breathing labored. The fire is contained. Most of our men survived. And Moretti? Isabella pressed, moving closer to examine his wounds. A grim smile touched Dominic's bloodied lips. Dead, he said simply. Finally, the single word carried the weight of years of conflict, of the personal vendetta that had defined much of Dominic's adult life. Isabella could see in his eyes that something fundamental had shifted, a burden lifted, a chapter closed. You're hurt, she said, focusing on the immediate concern. Badly. Dominic shook his head dismissively. I've had worse. Not according to Maria, Isabella countered, already moving to the medical supplies Tony had retrieved. Let me see. To her surprise, Dominic complied without argument, allowing her to help remove his shredded jacket and shirt. The wound in his side was a jagged tear knife wound, not a bullet hole, still bleeding steadily. It needs stitches, she said, trying to keep her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her throat. The injury was serious, possibly life-threatening without proper medical attention. Tony, Dominic said, his voice maintaining its authority despite his weakened state. First aid kit. The special one. Tony nodded, disappearing into another room and returning with what appeared to be a military-grade medical kit. From it, Dominic removed a small vial and syringe. What is that? Isabella asked warily. Something that will stop the bleeding long enough to get proper medical help, Dominic replied, preparing the injection with practiced hands. Military-grade coagulant. Not exactly FDA approved, but effective. He administered the injection near the wound, his jaw clenching against the pain. Within minutes, the bleeding visibly slowed, though the injury remained angry and raw. Tony, contact Dr. Petrov, Dominic ordered. Tell him to meet us at the secondary clinic in 1 hour. No details over the phone. As Tony moved to make the call, Isabella took Dominic's hand, her eyes searching his face. You could have died, she said quietly. Dominic's expression softened, the hardness of the mafia boss giving way to something more vulnerable. But I didn't, he replied, and Moretti will never threaten you or anyone else again. Was it worth it? She asked. The risk? The cost? Dominic's eyes held hers steadily. To keep you safe? Yes. Always. He hesitated, then added more softly, but there's something else. Something I realized tonight. Facing Moretti. What? Isabella prompted when he fell silent. I've spent 20 years building an empire of fear to protect someone I care about, without ever telling her that I care. His voice was rough with emotion rarely expressed. That's the true cost. Isabella, not the blood or the pain, but the distance I maintained. The connection I denied us both. The words hung between them. A confession more significant than any declaration of love. Because in Dominic's world, caring was more dangerous than loving. Caring made you vulnerable. Caring gave your enemies leverage. And yet here he was, admitting it openly, the final wall between them crumbling like the mansion walls under Moretti's explosives. Isabella tightened her grip on his hand, her own eyes filling with tears. I care about you too, Dami, she said softly. The boy who protected me and the man who still does. All of you. The parts that frighten me and the parts that make me feel safer than I've ever felt. In that moment, surrounded by the aftermath of violence, with Dominic wounded and the future uncertain, something shifted between them. Something fundamental and irrevocable. The connection that had been severed 20 years ago wasn't just restored. It was transformed into something deeper, stronger, forged in the fire of shared danger and mutual protection. Dominic raised his hand to her face, gently brushing away a tear with his thumb. When this is over, he said quietly, when I'm healed and the danger has passed, we need to decide what comes next. For both of us. Isabella nodded, understanding the weight of those words. What came next wasn't just about recovery or rebuilding the damaged mansion. It was about two people, once orphans, now survivors, figuring out if there was a future where their broken pieces fit together to create something whole. The days following Moretti's attack were a blur of recovery and reconstruction. Dominic's injury, while serious, wasn't life-threatening with proper medical care. Dr. Petrov, clearly accustomed to treating wounds that couldn't be explained to hospital staff, had stitched him up at the private clinic, administered antibiotics, and ordered rest that Dominic predictably ignored. The mansion had suffered significant damage, particularly to the West Wing, where Moretti's explosives had collapsed part of the structure. Crews worked around the clock to rebuild, while security was enhanced to address the vulnerabilities Moretti had exploited. Through it all, Isabella remained by Dominic's side, not as a captive or guest, but as something neither of them had fully defined yet. She helped change his bandages, insisted he take medication for pain despite his stubborn resistance, and gradually took on an unexpected role in the household. Maria Sanchez, surprisingly, deferred to her on matters regarding Dominic's care and comfort. Even Leo Mancini, typically stern and formal, began to consult her on decisions affecting the household during Dominic's recovery. 2 weeks after the attack, Isabella found Dominic in his temporary office set up in the East Wing while the West was being rebuilt. Despite doctor's orders, he was working reviewing documents, taking calls, maintaining his control over his empire even while physically compromised. "You should be resting," she said from the doorway, unsurprised when he didn't look up from his papers. "I am resting," he replied without missing a beat. Sitting down, not lifting anything heavy, taking the medicine, Isabella wheeled into the room, positioning herself across from his desk. "That's not what rest means, and you know it." Dominic finally looked up, a small smile touching his lips. In the past weeks, those smiles had become more frequent, brief glimpses of the man beneath the hardened exterior. "The business doesn't stop because I took a knife to the ribs," he said, "especially now. Moretti's death has created opportunities and vulnerabilities." Isabella studied his face, noting the fatigue beneath his controlled expression. "Power vacuums," she said, understanding more about his world than she had when she first arrived. "Everyone scrambling to take Moretti's territory, testing whether you're strong enough to defend your own." Dominic's eyebrows rose slightly, impressed by her assessment. "Exactly, which is why I can't show weakness now. Can't disappear to recover while my enemies circle. But you don't have to do it alone," Isabella said quietly. "Leo is capable. Your captains are loyal. They could handle more of the day-to-day while you focus on the bigger strategic decisions." Dominic set down his pen, really looking at her now. "When did you become so knowledgeable about mafia power structures?" he asked, his tone caught between amusement and concern. "I listen," Isabella replied simply. "I observe. And, contrary to what you might think, I'm not naive about what you do. I've accepted that this is your world. Dominic, I'm just suggesting you find a better balance within it." Something shifted in Dominic's expression, a recognition that surprised him. "You're right," he admitted after a moment. "I've always handled everything personally. Trust has never come easily. Because of Moretti," Isabella said, understanding dawning. "His betrayal made it hard for you to delegate, to rely on others." Dominic nodded slowly. "You see too much," he said, but there was no accusation in his voice, only a kind of wonder, as if he was still adjusting to being truly seen by another person. "Speaking of seeing things," Isabella continued, gathering her courage for the conversation they had been postponing. "You said we needed to talk about what comes next. For us, I think it's time for that discussion." Dominic's posture shifted subtly, tension entering his body despite his effort to appear relaxed. "Yes," he agreed quietly. "I suppose it is." A heavy silence settled between them, both aware that this conversation would define their future, together or apart. "I can't go back," Isabella said finally, "to my old life. I mean, not just because of what happened at the wedding, but because of everything since. I've changed. Dominic, being here, seeing your world, understanding who you really are, it's changed me." Dominic's expression remained carefully neutral, though she could see the effort it cost him. "Change how?" "I'm stronger," she replied without hesitation. "More confident. Before, I was trying so hard to prove I was capable despite this wheelchair. To convince the world I wasn't defined by disability. She gestured to her legs. But here, with you, it's never been an issue. You see me completely both my strength and my limitations without judgment. It's freeing. Something like relief flickered across Dominic's features. I'm glad for that. At least. But Isabella, my world is dangerous. Moretti is gone. But there will be others. Men like me don't get happy endings. I'm not asking for a fairy tale. Isabella said firmly. I'm asking for honesty. For the chance to choose my own path with full knowledge of the risks. Dominic stood, moving around the desk to stand before her wheelchair. He lowered himself carefully to one knee, bringing them eye to eye, a gesture of equality that moved her deeply. What do you want, Isabella? He asked, his voice stripped of its usual command, vulnerable in a way few had ever heard. Tell me what you want, and if it's within my power, it's yours. The question was simple, but the answer would change everything. Isabella took a deep breath, reaching out to take his hands in hers. I want to stay, she said clearly, not as someone to be protected or hidden away, but as a partner, someone who stands beside you, who helps carry the weight of what you've built. Dominic's expression shifted from vulnerability to confusion. A partner? In what sense? In every sense, Isabella replied steadily. Personal and professional. Dominic stared at her, genuine shock breaking through his usual control. Professional? You can't mean. I do. Isabella interrupted. I've seen how your world works. Dominic, I understand the power structures, the loyalties, the strategic thinking required. I'm not suggesting I become a street soldier or carry out violence. But there are other aspects of your organization, legitimate businesses, financial matters, strategic decisions where I could contribute. Dominic's shock gave way to something like wonder. You want to be part of this? Part of me? Even knowing what I am, what I've done. I want to be part of reshaping what you are. Isabella clarified. Your empire was built on fear and violence because that's what you needed to survive, to protect. But it could be more, with the right influence, the right balance. She squeezed his hands gently. Your strength and my compassion, your strategy and my perspective. Together, we could transform what you've built into something better. Dominic studied her face, searching for hesitation or naivety, and finding neither. You would walk this path willingly, eyes open to the darkness it contains. I would wheel this path, Isabella corrected with a small smile. And yes, eyes wide open, not because I want power or wealth, but because I want you, all of you, the boy who protected me and the man who still does, the criminal and the protector, the darkness and the light. For a moment, Dominic was silent, his expression unreadable. Then, to Isabella's surprise, he laughed, a genuine sound of wonder and disbelief that transformed his face. 20 years, he said, shaking his head. 20 years building walls, creating distance, becoming someone you could never love, only to find you want exactly who I am. Not exactly, Isabella amended gently. I want who you are and who you could be, the potential I see in you, in us. Dominic reached up, cupping her face with a tenderness that belied his dangerous reputation. Isabella Diaz, he said, using her full name for perhaps the first time since they'd reunited. You continue to surprise me, to challenge me, to see me. He took a deep breath, as if making a decision. If partnership is what you want, true partnership, in all aspects, then I offer it freely. My heart, my home, my empire, all of it shared with you, equal in value. As he once said, the echo of her own words back to her brought tears to Isabella's eyes. Equal in value, if different in circumstance. She finished softly. Dominic leaned forward, hesitating just a breath away from her lips, asking permission without words. Isabella closed the distance between them, sealing their agreement with a kiss that spoke of 20 years of separation, weeks of rediscovery, and a future neither had dared to imagine. When they finally parted, Dominic rested his forehead against hers, his usual mask of control completely absent. "There's something else," he said quietly. "Something I've wanted to tell you since the day at the church, but couldn't find the courage." "What?" Isabella asked, her hands still framing his face. "I love you," Dominic said simply. "I have since we were children. It's the one constant in a life of change and violence. The love I've carried for the girl in the wheelchair who saw me as a hero when I was nothing but a skinny orphan with a bad temper." His voice roughened with emotion. "Everything I've built, every choice I've made, it all circles back to you. Always has." The words washed over Isabella like a wave, filling spaces within her that had been empty for so long she'd forgotten they existed. "I love you too, Dami," she whispered. "The boy you were and the man you become. All of you." In that moment, something shifted within Dominic Costello. A fundamental realignment that Isabella could see in his eyes. The last wall crumbled. The final defense fell away. For perhaps the first time since he was 14 years old, he allowed himself to be completely vulnerable, completely seen. The weeks that followed brought transformation to Dominic, to Isabella, to the empire he had built. With Isabella's influence, Dominic began restructuring his organization, moving resources from illegal activities toward legitimate businesses. Violence remained a reality of their world, but it became a last resort rather than a first response. Rivals who expected the brutal retaliation typical of Dominic Costello found themselves instead facing strategic economic pressure or unexpected alliances that left them contained without bloodshed. The mansion was rebuilt, but different, warmer, more welcoming, less fortress, and more home. Maria Sanchez observed these changes with quiet approval, occasionally allowing herself a small smile when she saw Dominic and Isabella working together in his office or sharing quiet moments in the library. 3 months after Moretti's attack, Dominic surprised Isabella with a proposal, though not the traditional kind most women might expect. Standing in his fully restored office, he presented her not with a ring, but with documents. "What are these?" Isabella asked, accepting the folder he handed her. "Partnership papers," Dominic replied, a hint of nervousness unusual for a man of his confidence. "Legal documents making you co-owner of all my holdings, the legitimate ones. At least. Equal authority in all business matters. Equal stake in everything I've built." Isabella flipped through the papers, understanding dawning. "This is more than just symbolic," she said, looking up at him. "This puts real power in my hands." "That's the point," Dominic confirmed. "Equal partners, as we agreed. In every sense." He hesitated, then added more softly, "There's something else in there, too, if you're interested." Isabella turned to the last page, finding not a business document, but a marriage license. Blank, waiting for signatures. Her breath caught as she looked up at Dominic, who now held a small velvet box. "I thought perhaps we could make our partnership official in every way," he said, opening the box to reveal a stunning ring. Not a traditional diamond, but a deep blue sapphire surrounded by smaller stones. "Not because we need a ceremony or paperwork to validate what we have, but because I want the world to know that you're not just protected by Dominic Costello. You're his equal, his partner, his heart." Tears filled Isabella's eyes as she took in the ring, and all it represented not ownership or possession, but recognition of the unique bond they shared. "Yes," she said simply, "to all of it. Partners in business, in life, in everything." Dominic slipped the ring onto her finger, then knelt before her wheelchair to seal the agreement with a kiss that promised far more than legal documents ever could. Their wedding, held a month later, bore little resemblance to the disastrous ceremony that had brought them back together. Instead of a traditional church setting, they chose the mansion's gardens, transformed into an enchanted space beneath the stars. Instead of conventional wedding attire, Isabella wore a dress specially designed for her elegant, dramatic, celebrating rather than concealing her wheelchair. The guests weren't society friends or distant relatives, but the inner circle of Dominic's organization men and women who had witnessed the transformation of their leader and his empire under Isabella's influence. Leo Mancini stood as Dominic's best man, his usually stern face softened with genuine happiness for the couple. Maria Sanchez walked walked beside her as she wheeled herself toward her future. Their vows, written by themselves rather than borrowed from tradition, spoke of protection and partnership, of strength found in vulnerability, of 20 years of separation leading to a lifetime of unity. As Dominic placed the wedding band beside the sapphire engagement ring, his hands that had dealt death and violence trembled slightly with the weight of the moment. "I promised to protect you when we were children," he said, his voice carrying clearly to all gathered. "Today I promise something more, to stand beside you rather than in front of you, to share my strength rather than simply use it for you, to be worthy of the love you've given me despite knowing all that I am." His voice roughened with emotion. "You saved me, Isabella, from a life of solitary power, from a heart turned to stone. You brought light back to a world I had resigned to darkness." Isabella's own vows acknowledged the unusual path that had brought them together. "I spent my life proving I wasn't defined by this wheelchair," she said, one hand touching the sleek chrome of the chair that had carried her through life. "But you never needed proof. You saw me completely from the beginning. Today I promise to see you with that same clarity, all of you, the darkness and the light, to stand beside you in whatever challenges come, to be your conscience when needed, your comfort always, and your equal in all things." She smiled through tears of joy. "We were orphans who found family in each other. Now we build that family into something stronger, something lasting." As they sealed their vows with a kiss, the gathered witnesses rose in applause, not just for a wedding, but for the birth of a new era in Dominic Costello's Empyrean era, where strength was tempered by compassion, where power served protection, where a feared mafia boss and a woman in a wheelchair created something neither could have built alone. Later that evening, as the celebration continued around them, Dominic and Isabella found a quiet moment alone in the garden. He stood behind her wheelchair, his hands resting gently on her shoulders as they looked up at the stars. "Happy?" he asked simply. Isabella reached up to cover his hand with hers, feeling the wedding band on his finger, tangible proof of their union. "Beyond words," she replied. "And you?" Dominic was silent for a moment, his usual eloquence failing him. "I never thought this possible," he finally said. "Happiness, love, a future not defined by violence and fear." He bent to press a kiss to the top of her head. "You've given me what I never dare to want. We've given it to each other," Isabella corrected gently. "Equal partners. Remember?" Dominic chuckled. The sound still new enough to delight her. "Equal partners," he agreed. "In this life and whatever comes after." They rejoined their guests. Isabella caught glimpses of their future in the faces around them. Leo showing unexpected respect when she offered an opinion on business matters. Maria treating her not just with kindness, but with the deference due the co-leader of the household. Dominic's captains looking to her for approval alongside their boss. The transition had already begun. From feared mafia boss to power couple. From an empire built on one man's strength to a dynasty shaped by complementary forces. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. Their world still contained dangers. Their business still walked the line between legitimate and criminal. Their love would face challenges unique to their unusual circumstances. But it was their ending, shaped by their choices rather than the expectations of others. For Isabella, who had once been defined by what she couldn't do, and Dominic, who had been shaped by what he had to do, this new beginning represented the ultimate freedom, the freedom to define themselves, together, on their own terms. Their story, beginning in an orphanage, interrupted by 20 years of separation, rekindled at a failed wedding, had come full circle. The boy who had protected a little girl in a wheelchair had become a man who recognized her strength. The girl who had once depended on that protection had become a woman who offered partnership instead. Equal in value, if different in circumstance. Partners in all things. A love story unlike any other, but no less powerful for its uniqueness. From a humiliating rejection at the altar to becoming the equal partner of the city's most powerful man. Isabella's journey reminds us that endings are often just beginnings in disguise. And Dominic, who spent 20 years building walls to protect the one he loved, discovered that true strength lies in vulnerability, in partnership, in love openly expressed. Their story continues beyond these pages. Their legacy shaped by both his power and her compassion. Their love a testament to the truth that we are all equal in value, even when different in circumstance. Thank you for joining us for this tale of unexpected love and transformation. If this story resonated with you, please show your support by liking this video and subscribing to our channel. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you won't miss our next story. Until next time, remember that the heart recognizes what belongs to it, even across decades of separation.